Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of City Lights Live, the online edition of the City Lights events calendar. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and tonight we are greatly honored to have two writers whose work we've been following with great interest and enthusiasm for many years. City Lights and Wave Books are pleased to present Gail Scott, joined by Camille Roy. We are celebrating the publication of Furniture Music by Gail Scott, published by Wave Books. Before we begin, as is customary at the outset of each event, I would like to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. We'd like to take this moment to offer respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Gail Scott has over the years distinguished herself with a body of work that is at once lyrical as it is stream of consciousness and ever erudite. Her prose has been described, quote, a laboratory for concocting tales about cities across language, genre, and gender boundaries, unquote. With Furniture Music, Gail Scott chronicles her years in Lower Manhattan, immersing in a New York topography that includes poets at the junction where politics and art meet. The St. Mark's Poetry Project and the Bowery Poetry Club become points of departure for meditations on citizenship, race, class, gender, feminism, and the place of writing in the 21st century. Furniture Music is a masterpiece of interwoven threads of text, offering us new ways of thinking about prose and illustrating the deep connections between art and politics. Exactly the kind of work we've become very enthusiastic about here at City Lights. Joining her this evening is none other than Camille Roy. We are very delighted to have her with us as well. Camille is the author of Sherwood Forest from Future Poem Publishers, also the author of the books Cheap Speech, Craqueur, as well as the book Swarm, amongst others. Camille has co-edited Biting the Air, Writers Explore Narrative, published by Coach House Books. Camille's work has appeared in Americana and Open Space, the San Francisco MoMA blog. So join us now in offering a warm welcome to Gail Scott and Camille Roy. So very lovely to have you both with us. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And it's wonderful to be celebrating this book. Gail, I just love Furniture Music, and I'm excited about other people getting to experience it. It's so full of intimacy and so rich with poets that many of us know. It's just a terrific experience. So to get us started here, could you tell us a bit about the genesis of the project, the history, how it evolved, how it came to be?
Well, in 2008, just before the Obama campaign really got hot, I won a studio grant from the Conseil des Arts de la Québec for a studio in Soho for 6 months. I had applied for this studio 3 times and failed, and this was my last chance. And I managed to succeed this time. But my project wasn't at all to work on the book that I ended up writing. I was going to finish a previous novel that I was having a lot of trouble with called The Obituary. And I just needed to get away. But I ended up in the Soho studio. And for 4 years, I traveled back and forth to New York as much as I could, stayed as much as I could in New York. And once I left Soho, of course, I was rather impecunious, and I had to find places to live, which ended up being really good for the book because I ended up staying in, subletting places in many of the downtown neighborhoods in New York, Chelsea, East Village, Lower East Side, Extreme West Village. So it helped me to kind of get a take on that area. And all the time I was talking, well, one of the things that I hoped to get out of being in New York during this period was seeing what I could learn from the poetry that was happening around the Poetry Project and the then Bowery Poetry Club, And what I could learn from that in relationship to my prose, which I'm forever trying to move closer to poetry in a myriad of ways. And one of the things that I'd noticed on previous visits to the Poetry Project, and especially and the Bowery Poetry Club as well, was it seemed to me that we were, or you all in that area, were in a period of tremendous solidarity vis-a-vis what was happening politically in the US and around the world. I often thought when I was there that somehow the group of poets around these two places kind of knew who the enemy was, which I think at that point in Canada, we were a little less clear about. The other thing that was happening was that, well, I shouldn't say we were less clear, because the other thing that was happening, at least for me, was that we had a right-wing government in Canada, which I wouldn't say is unusual, but it was 10 years of a fairly center-right prime minister. And so as we were going to the right, the US was starting to look more progressive and exciting politically. And I'm always going to go somewhere where there's that kind of thing going on. And because I'm most of all interested in the relationship between formally experimental work and the politics of the moment in time.
That was beautiful in the book, that the way that the poetry community, with all of its intricacy and friendship, was kind of laid out against the political movements of the United States. There's lots of Obama material, and basically this covers the two terms of Obama. That's the delimiter. And it's just, there's so many layers to this book. And one of the layers I want to talk about is the layer of friendship. You know, it was, Eileen is in this book, Rachel Levitsky is in this book. I asked Gail if I could actually talk about them. They're called R and E, and many other people.
The R is in the book too.
Yeah, and people in the people attending, some people attending are in the book. So there is this delightful feeling of having readings and social occasions and cafes and conversations of the past just brought forward into my experience as a reader. It's very capacious. So, and also there's such a strong role for friendship. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about friendship.
You know, as a sort of foreigner, it's funny, if you're Canadian, you're a foreigner, but you're not a foreigner the way people from other countries are, because we cross the border all the time. But still, I was worried in that whole period, and then I decided it didn't matter, that I was looking through at that particular scenario through rose-colored glasses. And of course, I knew that there's a lot of sibling rivalry that goes on among poets, along with the love and so on. But it seemed to me that, relatively speaking, this moment resembled more than anything else the era of the as the Quebec independence movement was moving towards power, or moving towards a limited share of power. And in the early years, it was very it was left-wing. It was certainly social democratic under René Lévesque. And it was a period of total breakout from a profound sense of colonization of the Francophone population by the Anglophone population, because Quebec was conquered by the British, I don't know, 400 years ago. And, you know, we still have now it's the king on our dollars. And these things irk. Also, people were concerned about losing the French language and culture. It's kind of an outpost on the continent. New Orleans echoes it a little bit, but it's really an outpost on the continent. And if French is going to thrive anywhere, it has to be there. So there was this tremendous energy, and everything kind of popped wide open so that you could really feel. It was really a period where we felt that we could write and say what we wanted, and we could experiment in our lives, the way we conducted our love affairs and our sexuality, in our experiments with our art, in our politics. We were tended to be constantly active on that score as well. And out of that came a group called La Théorie en Dimanche, which was a group of 6 women poets. I was the only Anglophone, but we began to talk about how, and this was, what was funny about this was that it was very similar to the beginnings of the New Narrative movement, although we knew nothing about the New Narrative movement at the time. And it was very similar to the New Narrative movement in the sense that we felt that we were terribly vexed in the representation of who and what we were in literature, in culture, very much like the queer population in around the New Narrative group felt in San Francisco. So we formed this little group, the 6 of us, and we met for nearly a decade, I would say. And our meetings went like this. We didn't meet, we met maybe once a month, and we would start with a text in French about some issue concerning women and writing. And after that, and we would have coffee and croissant and talk about the text. It was often at Nicole Brossard's house. And once that little moment was finished, out came the wine. And we talked about our poetry, our fiction. And I mean, there were times when these meetings went on from noon till midnight. And there was a tremendous, I learned what solidarity meant really in that group. And I suppose when I came to New York, I was projecting that on the poetry scene there, which seemed to me in a very different time to be concerned about art and politics in a similar way to how we had been in the 80s.
Do you have a section you want to read that reflects any of this right now?
I don't know if I have. I didn't pick out sections to read to particularly. Well, there is a section I can read, actually. It kind of covers that territory. The section's called Le Bonheur, happiness, and it takes place in 2011. And one of the things that happened was that one of my lucky moments in all of this was ending up in the East Village, which was always kind of my dream, and staying in an apartment that I called Jay's Museum, and you'll see why it was so fantastic. And there's, I'm hanging around basically with people I know and love, so I'll read some passages from that. Le Bonheur. Vote early. Leave for Manhattan. May 1, eve of Canadian federal elections. Just as announcement, Obama getting Osama bin Laden, lading up Canadian TV in evening news, elbowing to second spot, historic Canadian vote, thought to be ushering in unprecedented social democratic regime. Fellow citizens, having got in chips and beer, for tomorrow's electoral joust, kind of like watching the Stanley Cup playoffs, n'est-ce pas? Treated primarily on their little screens to crowd of joyous USians gathering in Times Square for carnivalesque revenge celebrations. Only the worst tourists go to Times Square, snapping E. Her pickup parked near Chelsea Cafe. We're sitting with CR in from San Francisco to launch superb proem collection, Sherwood Forest. I want to write Eileen, writes CR, but I'm feeling guilty. I'm too high. I fold my muscles into wads and sleep soundlessly. I don't remember my dreams. They crumble, a soft cake, a picnic with Carla. She brings rosemary bread and astonishing pistachios. She reads to me about utopias. So touched and happy, I float right up into the sky. Mornings in Jay's museum, poetry in motion, arcane lamp shadows, cat faces, riverboats for bases, cutout face of Michel pasted to sequin ginger figure, books shelved wordy spines to wall, 'cause books, Jay's saying, making lot of noise. Early via bedroom window, close to rear building, guy 10 feet away coughing up stuff, showering, child somewhere speaking Slavic language, fresh voice, mother breaking into song for visitor, this near promiscuous proximity, exotic, whereas irritating back home. Now rain, what better lullaby than early morning rain, swishing through leaves outside window. Somebody's clock goes off. Somebody's clock goes off, not stopping. Somebody likely gone to work, maybe one of the black-clad silhouettes on sidewalk below, rushing, tight-band shoes, long tapered toes towards subway, clock pinging annoyingly, rapidly for hour. Otherwise, day strangely quiet. Glut of amazing poetry readings, raising spirits to point of effervescence, so that giggling way through $10 Japanese box lunch with S, you're near manic talking, recounting hilarious exchange with customs officer at border, looking startled in booth, then bursting out with laughter and northern saying, visiting NYC to check out downtown poetry scene. What can poetry do? It can't not do nothing. It must undulate with the 2:30 p.m. dance music, the soul patrons at Stonewall. Some old Stonewallers certainly in attendance at Church Hall Portmanteau reading, celebrating one of own Tim Blugo, down by AIDS at height of epidemic. The audience, mostly men, trimmed, gymmed, groomed, substantial gray hair, gathering in resistance of the idea that poetry can be fragile and ephemeral. Before you know, it's out of print, gone and forgotten. Some lesbians, E in plaid shirt, beautiful young girlfriend, and tiny pooch draped lengthwise on arm, older men gathering round, eyeing E, an alluring young lover, envious, you thinking, the pooch's little brown mug, as E reading Glugo poem, hanging on every word with intensity of the besotted. I'm in bed in the Plaza Hotel, New York. The guy who picked me up is in the bathroom, and I'm wondering what he'll want me to do, worrying that there's some secret way of lovemaking between men that I never heard of. South Ferry bus. Put your card in slot, get receipt. To be sans reçu, if uniform gets on, is to pay $150 fine. Eminent North poet, that's Nerbasi, will have spoken of acquiescence in face of uniforms in your own retrogressive way. Uniforms equal father, equal, always nervous at border, bus doors open, uniform gets on. Your arm proffering deferential ticket, such a good girl. Several other automatically submissive arms. Woman with Eastern European accent having none of it, yelling whole system confusing, plus not enough stops, plus, plus, plus. Uniform deboards, Guy Debord. At once sober rows of downcast eyes, animated, congratulatory, chatting conspiratoriously. From seat down aisle, loud laugh. Black passenger, no longer absorbed in his book, laughing, laughing, laughing at all of us, shaking with laughter still, when Gail, disembarking, halfway to South Ferry. The days mesh, they rain, washing piss smell off concrete, trees turning leaves forward to drink or away in repudiating wind, AC unit opposite adding soft, persistent whine, another somewhat churning, croaking like ancient lawnmower, blending with ancient brouhaha, ambient brouhaha, so that pours entire body, absorbing faintest environmental stimulus, like those petal faces abundantly fronting, walking rest, Greenwich Village dwellings, their little faces turning this way and that, catching sun rays floating upon breeze, you asking older male writer, you happening on in Greenwich, friend of late William Burroughs, if old beat having, as rumored, response armory at ready in case of unrest, knives, revolvers, rifles, yes. Was he kind? Very, or else very not. Walking back east, leaves blowing pleasantly, your face also turning this way and that, catching last rays, piercing shadows. I'll read a couple more sections. Nina Simone, around midnight, ushering in sleep, singing at Carnegie Hall, Broadway songs or angry Southern blues. Mississippi, goddamn, other evenings listening to strands of news, rumble of street, trace of neighbor music, thoughts loosen, multiply. Ah, there's Michelle on screen, smiling, confident, inviting rappers, spoken word artists, poets of various stripes to White House. Furniture music in back of heads is playing North's Prime Minister Harper, offering himself as cultural event at official Prime Minister residence. Bent knee, foot pounding hard on floor, smashing out rock song on keyboard. Imagine sleeping with that. So are you Essians really more easily blending highbrow and pop cult, for which American genius globally acknowledged, searching web for avant poets, either invited to Obama White House or somehow otherwise briefly part of wider discourse, you finding language poet. On right-leaning Fox TV, Bill O'Reilly's show, being chewed out for teaching anti-American class at Fordham, poet for duration, posting small smile, neatly footworking with faint humor round O'Reilly's charges of anti-cap American-hating rhetoric allegedly served up to innocent students, said poet, also seen footworking on Merce Cunningham dance studio floor located in classy elder residence overlooking Hudson, walking there further west than usual, losing bearings on curvy West 4th. But at last arriving at aforementioned Lang poet, as aforementioned Lang poet, doing quick cross-step barefoot across floor, red boxer shorts, signs saying nutty professor, choreographed by poet's avant dance partner, who torquing West Side Story, she's saying, into uncodified, non-idiomatic shapes and rhythms of the body outside of canonized genres or courtified vernacular. The West Side boy dancers, recast in parodic, same-sex, pas de deux, almost operatic female voice and background, singing lines from Nutty Professor's Reefer Madness poem. Lick, 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 no licking, derelict dictation, take a lick, Dick, derelict dictation, no licking.
Thank you.
That's so funny.
That was great. One thing that I want to just show people is that this book with its layers has the names on the side here are like identify quotes that just go through the text. So the text is always in conversation with people and also quotes, and this is on every page. So the book is constantly opening up to a lot of questions. Often they relate to poetry, and you have the line that you read, what can poetry do? And I feel in this text, one of the things you continually explore and test and measure and stress is this notion of what poetry can do and what poetry is doing. And your relationship as a prose writer to that, who's also like taking in poetics all the time. So, yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Lots of thoughts going in many different directions. The first thing is that one of the things that I feel about writing is, and this is the reason that my books tend to be very different from book to book. I do take usually about 6 years to write a book, so that's time for the moment to change and issues to be different. And I've changed places quite a bit too. And so every project tries to open up to place and to the art going on in that place and the politics, of course, in a way that requires endless sort of rejigging of my approach to writing sentences. So, for example, in My Paris, which is a 90s conversation with Gertrude Stein and Walter Benjamin's Arcades project, the verb is pretty well always written just in the present participle. So there's not, it's a kind of, for me, a Flannery kind of tone. The action kind of goes backwards and forwards. I mean, I was in Paris recently and I would not write. I mean, now it seems like everybody's on speed, you know, it's going like this. And so I wouldn't write it that way anymore at all. And you know, the sentences have become more and more staccato as I go along. And for writing the New York book, I felt that the staccato sentences really work with the cadence of New York and the movement. At the same time, I'm been interested lately in the kind of oxymoron between the contiguity of prose and of writing sentences. Mm-hmm. Every sentence is a little narrative, Renee Gladman says, and I think that's absolutely true. And the desire to kind of use a cut-up form. And I like the way in this book that I can intersperse the cut-up sentences with the many different voices of poets taking it in all kinds of different directions around all kinds of issues. So that's basically where I am right now. Yeah.
There's this quality that I really enjoy. There's certain things about writing prose are fundamentally destabilized in this book. And one of them is you actually described it somewhere as faint narratives. There are many narratives and they are faint. And so they are constantly sort of like emerging and then getting replaced. And that this just has this quality of opening up to so much of what's going on in the poetic and political moment. It's very interesting. It feels very much like an inhabited space and not a abstract space, but one, which is really close to how we engage, and there's another quality of like, I would call multivocal, that there's there's this quality of multiple voices, which is the dominant quality instead of the character,
That's really cool that you talk about that, because for me, one of the problem with, I was a journalist before I became prose writer, fiction writer, and I was a print journalist in the time when the kind of normal form for reporting, or the most frequent one, was the so-called pyramid structure, which you have a hook, and then it has to be something grabby so people will read it, because there's always a question of sales going on, and then you have to prove the hook. And so the way we did that was by quoting authorities on the subject, and you still see that happening in I mean, it's not necessarily that shape anymore, but you still see that happening. And when I started to write prose, I wanted to challenge that reference to authority and to dominant thinking about things. We called it dominant ideology in the left days. I think that term still works pretty well. I wanted to challenge that way of thinking, and that's why I became so interested in form, because I realized that there's something about writing in sentences that kind of pushes you forward to the next sentence and to the next sentence in a way that where you kind of fall into, at least I find this for myself, you fall into a way of thinking which relies somewhat on precedence and on proof of where you're going. So you get caught in a trap of I mean, poetry doesn't have this problem because it has enjambment, right? But you get caught in this trap. And so one of the things that I started trying to do was, it finally occurred to me that you have to break down the narrator and hence the characters as well, if you're going to achieve some kind of opening up of prose. And that's one way I've tried to solve it in this particular book. So the narrator it's a memoir. In principle, it's a memoir, but I wanted the memoir to be also somewhat distanced from the speaking I, because I think so often we get caught up in our own dramas. And so I kind of put Gail out there with all her warts and her struggles to deal with this new environment, to understand the importance of Obama, to be able to coincide that with her lefty Canadian politics, because I mean, I voted all my life for the NDP, which is the Social Democratic Party in Canada. It never won. It will never win, probably, and it doesn't matter. But then, the debates in the States are so different with the system you have. It really matters if it's one thing or the other. So where was I going with this? I forget now. Yes, so I kind of put Gail out there at a little bit of a distance. I address the narrator in the memoir as you, and when I disapprove of her, I call her Gail. And Gail is struggling with all kinds of things, and in the process of the debates around Obama and his coming to power, is Gail coming to terms and evolving, like I think many people hopefully did evolve. And then, of course, it was a horrible reaction in the other direction. But understanding a little better what racism is and how it works in discourse, basically, you know? Mm-hmm. So I'm not pretending that I understood it, but that was part of the struggle. Mm-hmm. And for me, that requires a kind of writing that's really open-ended and lots of space allowed to make mistakes.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have another section you could read for us?
Yeah, I actually have a very brief one that ties in with this. This is when I first came to New York. It was the first summer. It wasn't the first time I came, but it was the first time I was staying there for any length of time. And I got there around the 1st of July. And of course, it was horribly hot. And most of the I was looking for poets, you know, and most of them had gone somehow out of the city. There were a few left. And this was my first meeting with a poet. And I was very nervous, and I acted, I think, probably not, you know, brilliant. I certainly wasn't brilliant in this meeting, but I'll recount it because it's kind of, well, classic. Today, happy, nervous, walking to meet one younger poet still in sweltering city, who's standing, dreads softly tied, absorbed in blackberry outside South Asian resto, you two circling round each other, delicious vegetarian curry, in way of strangers at lunch. Loving he coming from Saint Louis, St. Louis, a little like chez nous, you thinking, bearing some old-fashioned French inflected style, elegance plus lead weight, particular Catholic stamp on continent's horrific colonial crimes and misdemeanors. Poet speaking, brilliant, eloquent, read your My Paris novel. Goth in its writing, acting out of being there, he's saying, immediate. You, stunned by perspicacity of his comments, unable, though his annotations, one of favorite books ever, to be offering single brilliant commentary. Instead, digressing to tall tales, unlikely true, repart indigenous grandpa, grandma, cousins, in-laws, finally a pause in self-conscious identitary prattle, exiting restaurant door, you shutting up long enough for poet in question to insert perfect query. How, in writing, he asking, were the Montreal Terrien Dimanche group rinsing sentimentalism out of queer? Standing by great Italian sausage shop named Murray's, you, devastated to have squandered occasion for beautiful literary discussion, weakly declaring, I have to go in here and buy sausage for a Frenchman, or his boyfriend. Lord Gail, will you ever stop? Such as it began in the Jewish hospital of St. Louis on Father's Day, you, not some babbling prophet, but another child whose parents' random choices of signs would disorient you for years. It was a summer of Malcolms and Shawns, as Blacks were transforming the small nation of Watts into a graveyard of smoldering metal, a crueler darkening as against the assured arrival of dusk, Selma to Montgomery. That's John Keane speaking.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful work. Yep.
One of the things that I experienced in your work is this quality of the city as a lived experience and as, in a way, an animating ideal. And it seemed to move. You spoke of that earlier, how it, in some ways, that sense of vital community was present in Montreal, and then you found it in New York, and of course also there's my Paris. So I'm wondering if you could talk about the city and in all of its aspects in your work. Is that a small enough question?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, I touched on it a little bit when I talked about the cadence of the different times and places I've been in, and it's not only the city per se, but it's the city in a certain context. For example, I mentioned Paris earlier. I wouldn't write it the same way today. Montreal in the 70s and 80s had this incredible French American noise. First of all, there's a particular accent of the way people speak there, and I think speak less there now because everything, language is becoming more homogenous all the time, and Quebecers also were at the mercy, or at least had to put up with Euro-French people looking down on the way we talk in Montreal. And so today I'm writing another book about Montreal right now, and the sound is completely different than the sound in Heroine, for example, which really, I hope anyway, tries to capture that particular moment. I don't know. For me, the city is, I didn't actually always grow up in the city. I grew up for part of my childhood in a small town on the Quebec-Ontario border, half French, half English. And I just remember that I was dying to get out, and I knew where I had to go. It was Montreal. There was no question about it. And I can't imagine writing actually about nature or the countryside, and these are big topics for many writers in Canada, but for me, it requires the intensity of different languages and cadences, different languages and all kinds of other cusps meeting each other. I really like writing in places where there's not just one language, where there is some kind of conflict going on, which allows writing to riff off the cusps between energies, shall we say. Yeah.
Is that one of the things you talk about in the book in a number of places is enjambment?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to have that reflected on in a book of prose. I'm wondering if it relates to some of these things you're talking about right now.
In a way, it does. I mean, well, there were a couple of things. We were talking about this last night. I don't know if you have those quotes in front of you, the quote from Shklovsky.
Do you want me to read it? I do have it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read it. If a line continues without breeding with the non-aesthetic, nothing is created.
Right. And can you read the other one from Agamben too?
Yes.
I mean, I can't find them right now, so.
Functioning something like poetic enjambment, its movement neither totally disjunctive, faint narrative being hidden somewhere therein, nor yet obsessively contiguous, which enjambment irresistibly drawing her into bending over into the next line to lay hold of what it has thrown out of the self, with only the barest hint of narrative. There's some Agamben embedded in that.
Yeah. So one of the things that fascinates me about spaces in prose and in poetry is that poets have this luxury, in my opinion, of having the open space at the end of a line. And at the same time, this is just the way I see it. It might not be, textbook anything, but at the same time, I like the idea that there is the possibility of narrative in that space. And I like to think about that in terms of prose, how you can open up the space between the period and the next sentence in a way that thinks like in Gem. And I haven't found a way to do it. Here's where the big contradiction that I was talking about earlier happens. I haven't found a way to do it which totally allows the hint of narrative to remain very faint. I think, and one of the reasons I haven't found a way, and one of the reasons I think I keep writing in sentences, is that there's some impulse in me to try and work things out, or at least to ask the right questions, or come close to asking the right questions. None of my so-called novels work as with closure at the end at all, but that's my way of going about it. I love the way you go about it in Honey Mine, which is a gorgeous piece of work, and the poem from Sherwood Forest that I quoted in the beginning, where you're floating. You maintain that somehow in prose in a way that absolutely fascinates me. And your fictions are, in another way than you're talking about what I'm doing right now or trying to do right now, your fictions do it in a completely different way, but which I find extremely satisfying. I could never, ever do it. I know that. And another person who does that in a very interesting fashion is Renee Gladman in her Ravickian series, where there's a kind of operation of deferral that goes on constantly in the prose, so that it does battle the tendency to treat narrative as Lisa Robertson has a great quote, something about a fixed smile, kind of, looking backwards. It's not the right quote. Her quote is great, and I wish I'd written it down. But there's something stiff and kind of precedent setting or precedent reaching with writing sentences, and I welcome any attempts to do otherwise, and those are two examples for me that are exceptional. Another one is Rachel Levitsky's novel about, what is it? The accident is
the story of my accident is ours. Our accident.
It's ours, yeah.
Yeah.
And the way she uses pronouns in that novel to achieve something like that as well. Yeah, mixing, changing the pronouns constantly. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have another piece you'd like to read for us?
Okay, well, I have one more to finish up. Short. This is also kind of has a community note to it, it seems to me. This is from 2012. So the last, this is actually the last section of the book until I go home, basically. And then I arrive back, and then I have a concussion and I can't work for a while, and it's all a mess. And then in 2016, again, very serendipitously, I come back to New York, forgetting that it's the day of Trump's election.
Mm.
I arrived there thinking that, Democrats are going to win and blah, blah. And, not the least concerned, like almost everybody I know. And then there is this, and this is the coda, then there is this stunned kind of week of walking about the city. I feel like I'm in a Hungarian movie called Damnation, which is about Hungary just before the right wing takes over, basically. So in this particular section, I still have hopes of a revolution of some sort. That it is a very moving period. It's Occupy Wall Street time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just at the point where the Occupy movements in the various cities are getting expelled. In Quebec at the time, there was this amazing student movement that blew up and lasted for, I don't know, a few months. And for me, it was, of course, all nostalgia and back to the 80s and what was happening then. And it was called the Carré Rouge movement because the students were wearing red squares on their knapsacks, and the demonstration started out in the strikes and so on as a movement to freeze tuition fees. And then it moved into a more political sphere, and it moved into the neighborhoods. And for a while, it looked like things were really going to change. And then they didn't. And here my narrator, Gail, is performing her boomer nostalgia about kind of watching the students in Montreal first demonstrating, and then she ends up in Chelsea as the Carré Rouge demonstration comes to a halt. And so the section is called, and it's kind of about Gail as a failed revolutionary or as an inadequate revolutionary. Chelsea Rouge. So you say you want a revolution. And this particular section is called Defense and Illustration. Stretched 0512 on Chelsea Airbnb bed, waiting for computer to charge, air fleeing to air-conditioned cafe, it being usual hot, smelly NYC summer day, cat's fleas proliferating in heat, making of silky ass, welting itchy grid, via open window, multivocal choir, hens being raised in court below by two cop-expulsed occupied poets, the baseline chicken techno, backing car horns, and morning brake screech down West Ave by Hudson, planes, landing squeakers squealing, melancholy sax, trains, construction racket, crazy variety of bird songs, birds symphonious compared to North backyard scratchy sparrows, starlings, now mockingbird, just up from South, along with warming climb, trying some Lady Robin notes. Not bad, not great. He doesn't care. Trying something else. Message from North. Gail, come home. Here it's the Carré Rouge revolution, and you in New York. But as in a dream, you're just arriving from the airport. the Chelsea brownstone swish. Anomalous on opening door to dim and cavernous atrium. Several feral cats, half light up blonde and flowing gown, faint southern accent, summoning tattooed dude sacks to be hauling luggage up silver painted stairs, up black painted flight, up narrower black flight, room, single bed on slanting floor, gaping doorless closet, stuff hanging out, giant chest of drawers, corner, nice little desk. Indeed, every room and house presenting as X-ray dream of detective novel. Once famous film star, its elegant drapery drawn to the revealing two habitants of Chelsea Common. That gorgeous pair of ex-Occupy youth, just up from sowing praying mantis eggs in garden for eating up mosquitoes, dyed black heads, bent over little screen at end of long table where North Carré Rouge student revolution moving into hoods, the dimming salon light, grazing youth's hair and mod apparel, inferring faint congruence with mansion's exquisite tiling. Woman on stairs, absent for days, feverish. Her maid explaining having marched entire scorcher of a May 1 demo in latex mixed piggy regalia. I'm sorry, I have to take a pause. You got another question?
Do you want to move some questions now, or what would you like to do?
Well, I would like to finish reading this section, but
okay.
I have to stop for a minute because I have this tender throat that coughs a lot. I'll see if I can go on now. We're woman on stairs, absent for days, feverish. Her maid explaining having marched entire scorcher of a May 1 demo in latex Miss Piggy outfit, abruptly reappearing, lovely, erect, in Queen Anne salon chair, mid toys, papers, cords, electronics, little table, bags of bagels, cat stuff. Leaning over, she's selecting piece of crinkly paper from box and stretching and attaching to curls. Presto, a sunflower, little child, big glasses, hidden behind book, emitting from time to time small animal sounds. Outside long windows, trees bending, heavens instantaneously darkening, one of frequent intense storms during canicule in city. Child pushing chair to open window, feet outside despite violence of elements. Don't fall, mother offering mildly. Like all those amazing trees, houses, and pirate ships, you are building with your mind and on paper, rooms attached with ladders suspended, spiraling around masts or trunks. Ask what anything is, and I will tell you. You say, ingenious inventions in rooms to house the energies of our new habitations. But Gail, climbing to room, pleading allergy to cats and their fleas, preferring, like any northern, to be alone, pulling sheets black, what black, to chin, to be fending off vermin, a little hungry, having buried salmon from fine corner grocer, deep in fridges, cornucopia of Trader Joe dumpster gleanings, courtesy of ex-occupiers, stepping out nights with shopping carts and gathering usable grocer discard for common use. Thus, laying there in top floor bed, you savoring instead, hometown Le Devoir, coverage of Carré Rouge uprising. Le gouvernement will not resolve this student conflict, as long as it fails to grasp that it is dealing with a generation unlike other generations, a generation whose goals exceed the education issue and whose protest is not likely to stop anytime soon. Well, we know that it did, but it's okay. Then dream cut to choked L-train platform, French sweater, pearl buttons, bloused in at waist, albeit notwithstanding Frenchy presentation, Gail less Bode type show-off dandy than Poe type asocial, for whom to be alone meaning to be dissimulated in crowd. The harder a man is to find, the more suspicious she becomes, who now disappearing into St. Mark's not usual poetry project parish hall reading locale, but actual church sanctuaries, elegant plain Protestant lines, muted, beige, white, pews packed with congregants from avant jazz poetry milieus, already enthralled to John Zorn, horn-ordained exaltation for all free musical improvisations, tilting toward religious in tone, now cacophony, referencing in reverse time order, a brouhaha outside your Chelsea early morning window, planes honking, people screaming, people screams, melancholy, train, wind, rushing traffic, and loud tunnel, crazy high, boat horns, flight booze and football field, loud buses, bird high wire, music acknowledging its sources. Simultaneously, deep in convo with Thurston Moore, Fender amp, crowd increasingly akimbo, eroticized. To paw is to possess. A gesture of loners? We are all mutants in our own gaze, calling out young poet Erica Kaufman, long black curls, faux leopard top. Let's hang the used condom on a branch of an olive tree. Let's ask one last question at the end of each chapter and read. Then long, tall poet Dana Ward from Cincinnati, thin arm pointed finger raising from lectern, like fragile, pale-stemmed winter plant, a skeleton, speaking of my skeleton, which floats alone and singing. Then Latasha M. Nevada digs, voicing musical composition of multiple tongues dancing together, shouting down an avalanche of languages, notably indigenous hegemonic forces, in foams so fierce, fraught, blady, and mobile, saying critic, their showiness and flaunt are like the fierceness of the drag balls, digs salutes in one poem, a visible weapon, a tactic simultaneously offensive and defensive, a war game for the whole body. Dream set now resto on 6, where Gail cafardon to are she hungry, on account of looking repeatedly for own personal butter, peanut butter, bread, fish in common fridge, either gone or buried irretrievable in refrigerator depths. Are to reply, it's, i.e. the Chelsea House, a good project. You just needing to get in step with positivism of era. Put up a sign, I heart you, but don't take my shit. Your resto table, already cleared of shared, sparse antipasti, prosciutto di Parma, salami toscano, crotonese, mortadella, focaccia, craving more. Outside window shorewood profile of well-known author, haunted houses, a terrace table, plus your NYC publisher, earlier saying you lucky to be launching obituary novel with cool younger gay poet who for sure drawing crowd. Are saying your problem may be age. You saying you're making me cry, tears glistening, a little glycerin in car lights, you crossing avenue to ATM on account of ours preferring cash-only restos. That's why no state healthcare system in this country, you snapping. Then are kindly offering prose work as present. Page opener. Since I have been at the Benjamin Institute, I have already contrived to become a mystery to myself. That's Walser. I had to get to Walser. I love that sentence.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. A real pleasure.
Yes, a real pleasure for me. I'm wondering if anybody out there would like to ask us a question. Ask Gail a question.
Or Camille. Why not?
Tisa Bryan made a comment. The story of our accident is ours. So I don't see any questions yet. Camille, if you have any final thoughts, maybe give people a minute just to kind of form their thoughts.
Well, maybe while people are thinking, there was one thing I forgot to say that I could say, I guess, which is that the name furniture music comes from Eric Satie's music, or the way he talked about his music. And for me, when you travel to another country, you bring the baggage from home. So that's what furniture music is here. It's the background music. It's my own take, and I think that probably anytime anyone speaks of another country, they're actually really speaking of their own country.
Well, if
I like the title a lot.
Oh, Tisa has another comment. She is curious about something.
Oh, great. Hi, Tisa.
Let me see. Tisa, we can unmute you if you want. Let me see if I can find you. Hold on. Here we go. Let's just unmute you.
Hi.
Hey, Tisa.
Sorry. Hi. I'll put my video on. Hello.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. This is wonderful. It's wonderful to hear you. Hi, Camille. So great to see you and everybody. I'm sorry. This is, of course, the precise moment I'm trying to formulate a question that someone keeps trying to call me. I'm curious about, since furniture music, as part of its fascination, is looking, Gail is looking, you are looking at the kind of differences and similarities kind of politically between Canada and the US, and how that kind of dovetails into writing, into the sociality around writing and solidarity. And I guess I was also wondering, and this might be a boring question, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that in terms of genre, where in the United States there's such a fixation on categorization, mostly for marketing purposes. And I'm thinking about hybridity, I'm thinking about autofiction, and I'm thinking about how in France, it's just writing for the most part. And I'm thinking about somebody like Renee Gladman, who has been really, inspiring and amazing. Not everybody can do what she does in terms of trying to name what she's doing and kind of theorize what she's doing. And I guess full disclosure also, in meeting you, Gail, many years ago when I was a student at Brown, one of the things we were trying to do with the Encyclopedia Project was to figure out how to theorize fiction in the ways that we were so jealous of poets, the ways that, poetry was so engaged with philosophy and theory, and that prose seemed to kind of fall out of that, even though on the experimental side, there was just so much happening that was hard to kind of name and pinpoint. So I guess maybe it's not even a question, but a something. I don't know. I'm wondering what's on your mind at this vantage point, as opposed to you know,
Yeah.
90s.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish I, had a more synthetic view of how things dovetail in the two countries, and it's a great question, and it's one I think about very often because, for example, probably the group in the U.S. that I've been the most involved with has been the New Narrative movement, and that's when I met you back in San Francisco in the old days, and as a prose writer for a while, I thought, well, this is where I belong, and I'm not saying I feel alienated from that movement at all. I'm feel very much in some ways connected to it, but I just don't have the same affection for narrative that some of the writers have, and for laying tracks. And I actually think I can speak better to Quebec, the US, than I can to all of Canada, the US, because the traditions are very different. And I think that one of the things that happened first of all, in French, it seems to me to be easier to drift from theory to everyday life. And I don't know why that is, but it just seems to be easier. And it's been really fun for me to try and take that into the English language without, I know sometimes I can sound heavy and pedantic, but the struggle is to figure out how to do that in a way that makes art, I don't know how else I can describe it. It's yeah.
Thank you.
It's a great question, too. So I'll write you in like 2 weeks with a proper answer.
I don't know. I guess it'd be nice to just be unfettered. And I'm thinking about this in terms of teaching and, the kind of leaning heavily into hybridity, which is a term I abhor, even though I used it because I couldn't figure out how to talk about what I was doing. So it's kind of a bit of a trap. But anyway, it's just, I love this reading, and it's like one of the first times I've heard someone really articulate, these things. Well, maybe not the first time, but first time in a while, post quarantine, maybe. Just the things that are happening between the sentence and the line, and rhythm and syntax, and maybe that's just where we live. It's syntactical more than narrative.
That's so interesting what you're saying, and it is where we live, and it's where some of us live as a group of friends and acquaintances around the continent. I think this discussion has actually been going on for quite a while, a kind of sub rosa, I suppose, but yeah, and I look forward to talking to you more about this.
Does anyone have another question? Looking around the gallery, if you want to raise your hand, I can kind of come to you and unmute you. No?
YD has a question.
I'm looking. I'm sorry. Where?
Somebody called YD.
YD. I'm looking him. Okay. Yeah, YD. I'm gonna unmute you. Oh.
Hi. I have a question about something really specific, but I noticed one thing that struck me about Heroine when I read it was in the way that you engage with French language, you don't translate it. Like there's fragments of French that are untranslated. And in some of your later work, like in My Paris, you do provide translations. And I was just curious about these sort of different ways of inviting readers to engage with language. I'm from Montreal myself, so I feel like I have an understanding of the language tensions. And so I was just really curious about that decision.
Oh, I don't, well, Heroine was actually written, way more in French in the beginning. And the publisher didn't think that would fly. And then somebody suggested I do a glossary for all the French. And I said no, because it's supposed to be an official language in Canada. So I'm not doing a glossary. Let somebody else, use a dictionary or whatever. When I got to writing My Paris, I was thinking more about translation. I call the comma the kind of comma of translation, and it's. I was thinking. I mean, Gertrude Stein being so present in that book, I was thinking a lot about. I don't even know how much she spoke French. I imagine she did, but I was interested in how she used French, and especially used the verb in French in order to, in her English sentences. There's a very particular way of. It seems to me like I mean, there's some linguist out there who's immediately going to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, and it's very possible I don't. But there's it seems to me that in French, the verb is really the motivating factor or the moving factor in the sentence, whereas in English, it seems to me that we're kind of headed towards the object in a way that's not the same in French. So I was interested in that, and for me, it was necessary to translate because I was interested in the movement between the two languages and how it ended up in English. Whereas in Heroine, it was basically a political kind of gesture to just shove out as much French as I could in the face of English Canada in a way. Yeah. Thanks for that question.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, I think we have gone past the hour, but I really want to thank you both for gracing our virtual halls. Gail Scott, congratulations on this fabulous, very, very compelling new book. And Camille Roy, thank you for doing the honors tonight. Really, you were the perfect accompaniment. And I really want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us. You help complete the circle as always. Today's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events like this one, our publishing program, and educational outreach, and all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So long, everyone. Take care. We hope to see you soon. Thank you both again.
Thank you so much.